Christ. So I had a sickness over the last few days, hence my voice being very kind of raspy. And I called in sick for one day. Of course, they didn't believe I was sick. For some reason, whenever I call into work, which is rare, I think I call in probably 2, maybe 3 times a year. I actually do get sick. I get flus and stuff. They always kind of act like very suspicious, you know? Like, well, are you sick? Or, oh, isn't it interesting you had the weekend off and you called out on the Friday? So you had a long weekend, you know, stuff like this, like real paranoid shit. It's like 3 times a fucking year. I got like something like 700 sick hours. Anyway, my fucking ribs are killing me. I know this is of no interest to anybody, but that's okay. My ribs are killing me, man. I don't want to be crude or disgusting, but from, you know, retching so much, you know. I had like a stomach virus, so I've taken some pills for my ribs, but every time I breathe, my fucking ribs kill me. Okay. The General. This is a story of one of the most notorious criminals in Dublin in the last 100 years. He was around the 80s, the 1980s in Dublin. That's when he was at his most predominant. And my life intersected with his twice. That's not good. If your life, if you Venn diagram into the world of a dangerous psychotic criminal on 2 occasions, that's really, really bad. That's really bad. And just to give you an overview of who the General was, back in the 1980s, he was literally an arch criminal. He was an infamous criminal. Brendan Gleeson played him in a film in the 90s called The General. And Kevin Spacey also played him in a movie called Ordinary Decent Criminal. Although he was anything but ordinary, he was anything but decent, which is kind of like strange. But in the 80s, he was the number 1 criminal in all of Ireland. His main thing, he didn't sell drugs. His main thing was robberies, high profile thefts. And he was crazy as well. He was like an insane character. He didn't like to be photographed, so everywhere he went, he wore like a balaclava or a motorcycle helmet or a hood. He did not like to be photographed at all. He appeared in court once in a Mickey Mouse t-shirt and his underwear and a balaclava, and there's nothing they can do. You can appear in court any way you want, you know? He was really, really crazy, this guy. He did a lot of very strange and unusual things. When he was considered one of the biggest criminals in Ireland, his childhood home, which was in a block of flats or high-rise in a poor area of Dublin, it had been condemned by the city planners, and it was scheduled to be demolished. And a lot of the residents had to move out, and they went to the General and they were complaining, you know, Vito Corleone style. Hey, they're knocking our home down. Is there anything you can do? So he tried and he couldn't do anything. So the day that the builders came, this is a true story, to knock the building down, his childhood home, he moved in with his suitcases to his childhood home, okay? He moved in. He set up home there. He unpacked his suitcases. He cooked some breakfast. This is true. And he started watching television. He just sat there in his little his mom's apartment watching TV and eating breakfast. And the builders were saying, we can't knock this down. There's some dude living up there still. And they're like, what the hell are you talking about? And they're like, he just moved in at like 7 a.m. this morning. We say, hey, where you going? You can't go there. And he goes, I'm going back up to live back in my ma's house. This is a true story. And he moved in, cooked breakfast, watched TV. So they went up to talk to him, and they knocked on the door, and they said, "Sir, you can't live here. This building's condemned. We have to knock it down." And he said, "Nah, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be here. I'm going to live here." Which he did. He lived there for like 2 weeks, you know. And they couldn't knock it down, and there were all kinds of court orders going. This is a true story. He had to do a robbery. It hurts when I laugh. He had to do a robbery, so he had to leave one night. And as he left, the security guard saw him leave. This is a true story. And he contacted his superiors, and he said, "You know that guy that's been living up in the apartment building? Well, he's just left." And they said, "No way." He said, "Yeah, he's just left. He just left for..." And they went in, they checked. They all came back to work. It was like 4 a.m. He wasn't there. And they said, "Right, go ahead, knock the building down." Which they did. They knocked the building down. They did a night shift. Anyway, he came back. The general came back the next morning to, I guess he had his loot and his robberies or whatever. He was meeting his criminal gang. He came back to go back into the apartment. There was nothing but rubble. And they're all laughing at him. They're all like, nah. This is in his biography. They're all giving him the finger. "Nah, what you gonna do now, asshole?" So anyway, they came the next day to clear the rubble out. And what the general had done is he'd set up a travel trailer on top of the rubble. And he put a little kind of clothesline outside. And he started living in the travel trailer on top of the rubble. And they were like, "What the fuck?" And he lived there for like another week and a half. And I guess he had the same thing. He'd go do a robbery or meet up with his gang. I mean, he was the head of a criminal enterprise, And when I say robbery, this wasn't just some burglary he was doing. He was knocking off huge jewelry fucking joints, man. Like, he was raking in millions. So he went and he did this robbery. Same thing again. They crushed his trailer, knocked it down, and cleared out the rubble. And he came back and they're like, "What are you going to do now, asshole?" And they still had some kind of, finalities to do before they started building. I mean, they had to build there, okay? So the next day they came back again, and he had a tent up, which he was living in. This is true. He was living in a tent on the site where they were going to build. And he said, "Look, we got to take care of this guy." So the Lord Mayor of Dublin, Ben Briscoe, actually came in and sat down in the tent with him. He said, "Listen, can you do me a favour? I'm the Lord Mayor of Dublin. Can you just move out of here? You proved your point." And he said, "All right, fair enough." So he moved out. He was always doing these kind of crazy, unusual things. He stole a Caravaggio, an $8 million Caravaggio. Okay? I actually looked up, before I did this podcast, I looked up the adjusted price. It would have been $22 million today. Okay? Because it was Irish pounds at the time. He stole a $22 million Caravaggio and he hid it in the mountains in a plastic bag. This is not a joke. A bin liner? He rolled it up and he put it in a bin liner and hid it in the mountains. A $22 million Caravaggio. And the cops were following him because they knew he had this Caravaggio. And they couldn't, they were following him all over the place. So what he did was he got into his car and he started driving into the mountains. And the cops that were following him, his tail, they said, "Right, we got him now. Gotcha, motherfucker. This is a true story. We got you." And they were going into the mountains and they were driving for an hour. They were driving for 2 hours. They were driving for 3 hours. Deeper and deeper and deeper into the mountains. Deeper and deeper and deeper. They were driving for 4 hours, for 5 hours, for 6 hours. And the gas started to get low in the cop's car. And the general's car. They both started getting really they were driving on fumes. Okay? And then suddenly the cops, they're looking at their fuel light and they're out of gas. And so is the general, basically. This is a true story. This actually happened. He's out of gas as well, and he's about 50 feet ahead of them. And he gets out and they're looking at him and they're like, what are you gonna do now, asshole? What the fuck are you gonna do now? You brought us 7 hours into the fucking mountains in fucking Wicklow. What are you gonna do? So he got out. He opened his trunk and he had a tank of gas in the back of the trunk, one of those red tanks of gas. He filled his up and he's looking at the cops and he's like, "What's up, boys?" He was always doing weird things like this. And then he drove off and left them in the middle of nowhere. So back in the 80s, your radio, you didn't have mobile phones. You'd no signal at all. They were stuck there for like 2 days before they had to be rescued. It was freezing cold up there. Anyway, long story short, here's how my life intersected with this guy in a very, very, very unusual way. I had a friend called Wolfgang, and Wolfgang was an entrepreneur, and he started to get an idea of having a hot dog stand in what was considered to be one of the most prestigious nightclub strips in Dublin, Leeson Street. Okay, I mean, this was prestigious for the 1980s. Like, in order to get into this club, it was like $100, which was a lot back then. Bottle of wine was like $200. The cheapest bottle of wine was like $200. It was ridiculous. The Leeson Street nightclubs were like, Stringfellows was there everywhere. It was like rock stars were there. And he set up a hot dog stand. Nobody else had done this. He set up a hot dog stand and he started selling hot dogs for outrageous prices. Like probably 10, 15 times what it would cost to make the hot dog. And he made a fucking fortune. Like, he started making a fortune. So the general's men came to him. They said, "Hey, look, we own this strip. You know, and anything that happens here business-wise, the nightclubs, everything, you got to give the general, who's this arch criminal, you got to give him his cut." So my friend Wolfgang said, "Go fuck yourself. You're not getting any of my money." So, long story short, this is how my life intersected with his, and not really, in a kind of a roundabout way. One night, Wolfgang is watching TV with his sister and his sister's friend, and a knock comes to the door, and 3 armed guys burst in wearing balaclavas, and they punched the crap out of my friend Wolfgang. They literally just punched the shit out of him, knock him to the ground, his bloody nose. They slapped the girls around. They tied them all up. Okay? Put gags in their mouth. And one of them puts a gun to Wolfgang's kneecap. And then he gets on a walkie-talkie and he says, "I'm ready." And he listens, and a voice on the other end of the walkie-talkie says, "Okay, go for it." And that voice was the general. And it was at like 8 p.m. And at that time, 8 p.m, when the general said go for it, the general walked into a police station and reported his bicycle stolen. Created an alibi. And when he said go for it, the man holding the gun shot my friend's kneecap out. He blew it out. Put him in extreme agony. He was never able to walk again. Walk properly. He had a plastic kneecap after that. He had to go to the north of Ireland to get it done. But he was never able to walk properly ever again. And obviously he gave up the hot dog business. So that's the first way that my life intersected with this guy, who was an unusual guy. And not directly, but kind of like, I was like 2 degrees away from him. You know, because I went to visit my friend in hospital. I went up to the north of Ireland to visit him. And he was in pretty bad shape, man, you know. He was never the same. He couldn't walk. He could barely walk again, you know. So, and that's today's episode of The General.